In the late 1800s to early 1900s, there was a man, a mad monk, a spiritual healer. Truth and myth blend together in his story as it is recorded in the history books. He was born, they say, in the village of Pokrovske, along the Tura River. But from humble beginnings came greatness. The man went on to become a monk, a healer, an influencer, who found his way to the inner circle of Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra, who took care of their hemophilic child through, allegedly, the healing power of prayer, who became an infamous figure throughout Russia, whose influence over the Tsars the people began to fear. This man, again allegedly, survived multiple assassination attempts, stab wounds, poison, gunfire. Only when he was beaten by a gang of conspiring noblemen and thrown into the Malaya Nevka River did the man finally succumb. Death by drowning, in a river not unlike which he grew up by. Such was the fate of Grigory Rasputin.
Say that again?
I have a confession to make. I'm one of those writers who spent entirely too much time on TVTropes. For those unfamiliar, TVTropes.org is a website that names and compiles a growing list of storytelling tropes that creatives frequently make use of in their work. The website makes it a point to emphasize that tropes are not bad and don't equate to cliches. They're just elements that recur across multiple works and across time. I find myself interested in tropes that originate from gaming particularly, because often they're byproducts of developmental constraints and restrictions. Take algorithmic story branching, for example. It's a trick RPGs use, in which outcomes such as character romances are reliant on player choices earning a hidden score in their relationship with characters, as opposed to an ever-evolving equation that takes into account every interaction and dialogue decision. As mentioned before, constraints and the tropes that come with them aren't bad. They're technical roadblocks, puzzles even, that developers have been cleverly and creatively getting around for years.
So when you have lots of fish, each one of these characters needs to have an entire skeleton of joints. There's like 60 to 100 joints, and every frame you have to update all of those joints per fish. So instead of just having 10,000 fish to update, you have 10,000 times 100 joints, which is crazy. So we had to figure out a different way to get the density that we wanted. And our answer to that was static mesh instancing, which is a technique that's usually used for doing grass or other kinds of foliage on the ground. And we actually wrote our own variant of this kind of system for Abzu.
In fact, even a cursory Google search will reveal the same perspective on constraint that creators have been echoing for ages. Limitation encourages creative thinking. There are some gaming tropes, though, that have been joked about and laughed about so many times that they run the risk of becoming obsolete. Especially as gaming moves forward into a new console generation. One of my favorite examples is what TVTropes aptly calls super drowning skills. Basically, because swimming mechanics are either difficult or a lot of thankless work to program, or because bodies of water can provide a nice, seamless boundary for your map, it's not unusual for player characters in games to lack the ability to swim. Some games get around this in clever ways, such as Infamous, in which Cole McGrath's new electrical superpowers have turned water into one of his great weaknesses, or Ratchet & Clank, in which Ratchet can swim, but will get eaten by a giant fish if he swims for too long or too far outside a set boundary. While these are nice ways to circumvent the very real question players have about their athletic, adventurous, and often macho, hypermasculinized player characters somehow being unable to, touch water, oftentimes they feel like an afterthought. Which is fine. Not all games need to make it a priority to address every common trope. In fact, there's even good justification for it, as noted in a 2009 Kotaku article by Stephen Totilo. Totilo spoke to several developers about the issue, and learned the two most common reasons they omit swimming. 1. It's difficult to make swimming fun, dynamic, and interesting, especially given the animation requirements, and so it makes more sense to divert resources elsewhere. And 2, the threat of drowning can offer another easy obstacle for the player. Or well, easy for the developer and challenging for the player. But that's why I want to talk about Psychonauts, one of my favorite platformers of all time.
My name
Starts with a D.
is Rasputin. But everybody calls me Raz.
Helmed by visionary director Tim Schafer and developed by his incredible team at Double Fine Productions, Psychonauts is a cult classic of a game that just screams passion project. It's weird, it's wild, it's stylistic as hell, and in my obsessive nerd brain, it has the best approach to super drowning skills and constraints around water I have ever seen in a game. Ever.
Let's get him!
I can't swim.
The player character Razputin Aquato has an aquaphobia, which is directly tied to both his backstory and the larger game world. Because in his youth, Raz, along with his entire family, was cursed to one day die in water.
Have you been associating with psychics?
Dad,
Psychics. Fortune tellers. They killed your grandfather. They cursed our entire family to die in water.
Yes, but
Including you, Rasputin.
It's absurdly simple, but brilliant. The writers could have stopped there. Look on TVTropes and it lists Psychonauts' drowning skills entry as subversive, but I think it's even more than that.
This is the stuff I was always really excited to get back to, because in the first game we did develop a lot of his family history and why it leads to him having special powers and weaknesses that he has in the first game, and getting to go back and look at what caused that and how it's not over yet. His backstory's not over.
And how it's...
I guess backstories are technically over, but some of the
You're always making new backstory.
events
Put that
are
hostage.
coming into his future.
In my view, it elevates the trope into storytelling genius, an integral part of the puzzle. See, Raz's aversion to water bleeds into every aspect of the game in its own unique way. In gameplay, contact with water results in a nifty little animation, in which a hand reaches out from the surface and tries to pull Raz in. The canonical name for this is the Hand of Galaccio, the Galaccios being the rival family that cursed Raz.
You have a water phobia? Me too!
no. Well, yes. My family has this problem with water. It's a bunch of hooey anyway. Some old gypsy curse about how we're all supposed to die in water. If you can believe that.
Oh, I thought it was about the whole thing with the brain-eating fish that walks out of the lake at night to hunt for victims.
Within the story, Psychonauts is a game about the psyche, about the multitude of ways in which we process fears, feelings, philosophies. Raz is a runaway who joins up with Whispering Rock Summer Camp, a camp for young psychics training to be the next generation of Psychonauts. At Whispering Rock, he learns from his mentors, veteran Psychonauts, about how to enter the minds of others, how to help guide them with processing their thoughts, and so each level takes place in the mindscape of a different character. What the game gets so right is that Raz and the Psychonauts are never fixing these people, but doing outreach, doing work to understand them. It's a process of empathy, of spiritual healing. And this is why Psychonauts' level design is so brilliant. Each level is a unique perspective, a manifestation of a different worldview, and all the gameplay eccentricities that come with it.
You! Destroy that bridge! For France!
For France! I hate your stupid bridge. This is how much I hate you. Ha ha! Suck on that bridge!
Learning these eccentricities becomes a labor of love.
Agent Vodello? I have been ordered to report here for levitation training.
Among my favorite mindscapes is Mila Vodello's, one of the camp's main instructors who teaches Raz the levitation ability. As the name implies, levitation allows Raz to float off the ground and over most obstacles. And the tutorial for this ability ends with a really great moment. Raz levitates over fire, over lightning, and over acid, but discovers he can't levitate over water. It surprises Mila quite a bit.
That shouldn't be happening. Darling,
do you have some problems with water? Do you want to talk about it?
It's a long story. Maybe later.
Okay, I'm always here for you, darling. Let me just say that it's very normal for boys your age.
But let's zoom out for a second and look at how Psychonauts operates outside of its characters' mindscapes. At the edge of Whispering Rock lies Lake Oblongata, a large water body placed between the camp and the game's second sandbox, Thorny Towers, an old, abandoned mental asylum.
Where's the milkman?
I'll bet he's sleeping on the job. His milk is delicious. Everybody wants it. He'll be here soon. Then the lies will end.
Besides being a natural barrier between two extremely disparate locations, one early game and one late game, Oblongata also serves as the threshold for Raz's journey. Early on, you can't canoe past a certain part of the lake that's been cordoned off. You just see the horizon, with an ominous blackness looming on the other side. But the moment when you do cross is also the moment when Raz confronts his fears. He climbs into a bathysphere and goes underwater in pursuit of a giant mutated lungfish that's been abducting kids from camp, including but not limited to Raz's friend and future love interest, Lily.
Okay, then we'll talk about that making out thing later.
Why do boys have no concept of a moment?
After a heated battle in an underwater air bubble, look, it's better not to ask, Raz enters the mind of the lungfish, his first excursion into the psyche of someone outside camp, and outside the bounds of his training.
Someone evil is creeping around at night like the three-toed monster at Bogey Creek and stealing children. He takes your girlfriend. There could even be a sanitarium nearby. Maybe a mad scientist has burrowed underneath from the mental institution. And there's a little drawing. There's a summer camp, and there's Lake Oblongata and the moon. And there's a sanitarium, and I was imagining a tunnel, which later turned out to be the lungfish, which just carry you over.
Following a pretty amazing level, literally called Lungfishopolis, he befriends the lungfish in question and enlists her help in crossing the rest of the lake. From his ordinary world to a new one, a special one. At Thorny Towers, all gloves are off. The minds you enter are no longer those of teachers or of your own. This time, you're doing actual work with asylum patients who wrestle with complex inner demons. What color is the sky in your world? This was the question Schaefer and his team posed to each other, in order to parse out different worldviews to bring into the game. It's also the title of Double Fine and Two Player Productions' excellent documentary about the making of the game. One I wholly recommend, is one of the most harrowing and moving documentaries about video game development I've ever seen. But it's that question I want to return to. What color is the sky in your world? The final mindscape of the game is a mashup of Raz and the antagonist's psyches. Enter Tim Schafer's infamous Meat Circus.
Alright, so I said Psychonauts is my favorite game, one of my favorite games. Meat Circus.
We agreed not to talk about. Okay, all right, that's fine. I was gonna ask you, what is one angry question you get the most often? And I was like, for me, people would bring up Meat Circus from Psychonauts.
Right.
Which is very hard to play if you're a baby and complain a lot. But I've obviously taken it really well. But
a grueling gauntlet of timed inputs and platforming, the Meat Circus is Raz's worst fears brought to life. He finds himself back in the circus environment he fled from, tormented by a warped nightmare version of his father and surrounded by meat because of his opponent's past.
What's it going to be, son? Die in the water? Or show me what you got?
In the climactic build-up to the final boss fight, Raz is forced to climb higher and higher as the water level gradually rises beneath him, threatening to drown him at any second, unless he keeps on climbing. The most massive moments in Raz's arc have to do with him overcoming water, challenging the after effects of his Galatio curse as well as his super drowning skills, as TVTropes calls it. He goes underwater to fight for his friends. He ascends above water to fight for his own mind. He does both of these things as a dynamic, growing protagonist who comes into his own, taking cues from both those who've come before and his own unique skill set. And in challenging Raz and the player, Double Fine challenges themselves as developers too, with a trope that, even today, feels a little dated, and even in 2005, they were so ahead of the curve on. No, really. The only other game I can think of that's this cheeky about drowning skills might be Red Dead Redemption 2, where the protagonist Arthur is perfectly capable of swimming, but his ally John Marston isn't. Arthur makes fun of John for this constantly, and the player knows it's Rockstar making a jab at themselves, because they'd been perfectly guilty of having John suffer from drowning skills when he'd been the lead character in Red Dead Redemption 1.
In fact, you can safely wade him out pretty far and he'll stand there, even with his mouth and nose submerged. But one step too far and it's adios amigo, hello watery grave.
What's more, at the end of Psychonauts, Double Fine gives themselves an out. They imply the curse can be reversed one day. They leave open the possibility for swimming to be an unlockable feature in the Psychonauts series at some point, perhaps when the technology will better allow them to execute it in the way they want to. Raz was not always the planned protagonist for Psychonauts. In an earlier build of the game, it was this guy. In What Color is the Sky in Your World, the developers mentioned that they changed this character to Raz because of issues with animating his hat. Again, thank goodness for constraints. But what I find interesting is that they changed his name too. Originally, this protagonist was conceived as D'Artagnan, Dart for short, named after the famous musketeer who, in the literary world, inspired Alexandre Dumas' The Three Musketeers. In Dumas' stories, D'Artagnan is a runaway, just like Raz. He flees to Paris, hoping to join the Musketeers of the Guard, and is initially rejected. He befriends the titular Three Musketeers and goes on to become their fourth. The parallels with Psychonauts' story are honestly most likely intentional. The most damning proof of this might be Coach Oleander, who's designed with a scar across his cheek, a la Comte de Rochefort. But I think the move away from paralleling Three Musketeers opens up Psychonauts in an interesting way. The simple name change from D'Artagnan to Rasputin reflects a change in prioritization, whereas the former paralleled a plot and premise, the latter parallels a character. A historical figure whose name has become associated with legend, whose methods and legitimacy are questioned even to this day, an easy analog for psychic powers and healing, whose relationship with water has become almost as mythical as the man himself. But Raz is no Grigory Rasputin. He's at the same time his own character in his own world, making his own way through the darkness. Psychonauts stands as a premier example of constraints encouraging creativity, and from the animation of a hat to the challenges of making video game water interesting, Raz is a byproduct of those constraints in the best possible way.
Thanks for the note. You have really nice handwriting.
Yeah, well, I was a calligraphy major in college, actually. Ugh, this just gets worse and worse the more I know.
If his super drowning skills pose a narrative problem, then what Double Fine provides for him in exchange is something both inspired and wholly original, much like Raz himself, something I like to call the Aquato solution.
I played a lot of Rayman 2 and we were making Psychonauts that had a big influence on it. I think in the art, I really love the way the textures are painted. It's funny, it's been years and years since I played it, but there's certain platforms, I remember the way they felt. Oh, come on. That is cheap. Oh!